that we're, from what I heard at the last meeting, you're never going to get past that line in Mendham. But at Central, you are going to get past that line. And once you do get past that line, then you have the opportunity to help, again, a very small group of children. From what I understand, at the last meeting was, my number was wrong, I believe it was 80. So you're, again, seniors already get parking, so that's 20 roughly, assuming equal distribution. There's another 20 that are juniors, so you're really affecting roughly 20 children, 20 parking spots. And from what I was led to understand, there are at least 80 parking spots that are going to be raffled off at some point in the next few months. There's several were raffled off at the end of last month.
Not raffle, lottery.
Not a bad idea. I paid for a parking sticker when I was in high school, so I can't believe they don't pay for parking stickers now. There'll be a lottery for the 80 parking spots. And so I'm asking this board to adopt a resolution with some sort of policy along those lines, providing preferential parking, if there are spots available, for those juniors who live within the radius where they are not provided with parking.
If I could just respond, and the board can certainly take that into account. I had a conversation with Mr. Muscatello immediately after the board meeting. I know that he spoke to you, and then I spoke to him afterwards. And one of the things that he said to me is that there were other factors, not simply the ones that you were talking about in terms of volunteer students who wanted those particular spots because of extracurricular or sports activities. So I need to revisit that conversation because he made it seem to me as if there were certainly other pressures on those spots, and his position was that if he began to open it to one preferential group, there were other groups beyond what you just mentioned that could make a claim for fairness. And his feeling was to continue with a lottery, not a raffle, that would put him in a situation of being able to offer an equal chance to as many groups as possible. So I would need to speak to him based on what you brought up this evening.
It was strange because the conversation that I had with the two different gentlemen, approximately a month apart, was almost virtually identical. That they went into, there was kids who participate in sports after school as part of school. There are kids who participate in other sports that aren't part of school. There are kids who have jobs. There are kids who have church activities. There are kids who have play activities that are not part of school, play activities that are part of school. And they ran through almost an identical list of outside activities. But again, all of those activities, I assume there's a sports bus at the end of the day, 6 o'clock? There's no, okay. We live around the corner, so we always have to pick them up anyway. So those are all voluntary activities, again, that the parents are opted to let their children or have their children participate in. If this one group of approximately 20 kids from Central didn't choose this, didn't ask for it, and in fact have had something taken away from them, and that's what I'm asking for, is in effect something that costs this board nothing to replace what you've taken away from them. Assistance with transportation to school.
If you could leave me your number.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, and just confirm that it's not just optional activities. I think we were under the impression that there were other pressures besides the optional activities. Okay. Yes, Jane.
Anthony, I don't know if you remember the conversation you and I had on this topic. I didn't picture your name, I'm sorry.
Steve said
before even came to the last meeting. I asked Anthony the identical question: why can't we provide to juniors who have lost courtesy busing, who no longer have transportation, the opportunity to park in available spots? And the only thing I would, in addition to supporting 100% what this gentleman is proposing, but I think the board should consider it, I also have information contrary to what you had heard from the administrators here. You had come back to me and told me that there were no parking spaces available at Mendham High School, and you said that at the last meeting. I understand that there are quite a number of open spaces down by the field house, parking spaces by the field house that are vacant during the day that are not being used. It would be great for juniors who lost courtesy busing who could now drive to school.
They would be great. I did the research on that, and what I found out was that the number of students who have requested parking spots at Mendham who are seniors exceeds the number of spots. Because of the configuration at Mendham, what happens is, since students don't have assigned parking, spots at the bottom are the ones that remain unfilled when someone's absent. So that if every student who requested a spot who has a car and has been given parking shows up on that day, those spots would be full. problem with Mendham High School particularly, although it extends to Central also, is if a student drives to school, in excess of the number of students that we have spots for, that student gets here and has nowhere to park because, you know, they've cut off parking along the adjacent streets and they're not allowed to park at the shopping center. So that student then drives back home and then has to get away back here. So having done the research on that, those aren't open spots other than the fact that kids are absolutely there. And we don't really have a control on that. And if this board tells me that you would like to risk doing an allocation of spots in which kids could show up, particularly at Mendham, when you don't have the ability to go anywhere else and not have somewhere to park, that's an issue.
Yeah, well,
It's a safety issue.
The airlines overbook, assuming that a certain percentage are not going to show up every day. You know, it's a similar topic to what we discussed with the school buses. You know, they've got buses running at about 50% capacity because, you know.
Airlines overbook and they have the ability to offer someone a voucher. I don't know what to do with someone who shows up and I don't have somewhere for them to park. I could look at that. If this board tells me to, I can continue research.
And maybe the answer lies somewhere between allocating 100% of the spots that are available daily and 0 spots.
I would be happy to.
Say we allocate a few, this gentleman was suggesting 20% for some reasonable.
With this legislation that Mr. Severud proposed, would it be possible to pass it for just policy for just one school or for both schools? Would it have to apply to them?
Policy across the board.
Okay. Because I know personally, especially in senior parking at Central, when I pull into school, there are about 50 or so cars without any passes on them, and all those juniors are getting in, and they're actually breaking the rules because they don't have any. We do have the lottery system, so there were those certain juniors who got the parking passes. However, there's an excessive amount who don't have it. So space-wise, just to speak on behalf of Central, we have a lot of space for these juniors when there are extra juniors who are breaking the rules which currently exist. And most of those juniors probably already have the busing. So on behalf of Central, I know that we do have the space as a senior who's parking. I don't find that my spot is taken. With the tennis courts and with the extra spots that we have now, the construction is done. I know that it would be beneficial to those kids who live nearby because since busing is not provided for them, especially if those kids might fall into the other categories. Like you said, there's some kids who are going to like extracurricular activities or church activities, and some of those kids, I know Lindsay's on my fencing team, so if she's at the fencing, she has to have her parents come pick her up because she doesn't have the busing, but if she had the option of being able to drive and be able to later meet, she could go home without having, but she doesn't have the option of taking the bus. So those kids might fall into the other categories. I'm not sure, you weren't sure what those categories were, but there might be some overlap.
I know there were more than that, and I know that the situation between Mendham and Central regarding those number of spots is markedly different.
If I may add something, if you don't mind. Also, the roads here in Mendham, I'm not that familiar with town, but there's clearly sidewalks on most of the areas where I drive through Mendham. Whereas in Long Valley, there's not only is there not a single sidewalk, I don't even know if there's any in town, but you're forcing kids to walk on Landers Bartley Road, is that the road school's on? Which has no shoulders, especially when there's snow piled on both sides. You're walking in a lane of traffic and putting the kids in a dangerous situation that the school apparently fostered about a year or two ago by letting or suggesting or allowing the kids to. I'm not. My kids weren't driving at the time, but I saw the kids parking at Palmer Park.
I can answer both of those questions. First, we're not suggesting that kids walk down Bartley Road to get to school. We aren't providing courtesy busing, but we're not suggesting any other method of kids getting to school. That is between you and your student. Secondly, the parking at Palmer, we did try to restrict that. And we talked to the police department in the town about that. They can't do that. They have to completely close the park to restrict it from students and their parents who in better weather are taking their young children to the playground there. They would have to pass an ordinance that would completely close the park during school hours, which would negatively affect other citizens.
Which they've actually done for the last several months. There are the barrels across
but that's
the.
because they can't follow the locks and all of that.
But even before then.
That's not.
But it is such an unsafe situation, and there are actually other programs that are available, such as Safer to School, Has anyone looked into possibly money from Safe Routes to School, which is a federal program, that would be able to fund the construction of sidewalks along that road so that it might be a little safer for kids who either want to ride their bike or walk, since they're not getting busing anymore?
I did talk to the mayor recently, and he indicated that they are working with the county to, they might not be able to actually put in sidewalks, but to grade the shoulders so that they, and maybe, put down gravel or something so that they are at least walkable.
The problem with that is when the snow is out, they're only going to plow up to the edge.
But if they're graded, that might, might solve some of that issue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Yes.
Marcia Astle, Chester Township. On the agenda tonight, you're going to approve a disability maternity leave for Mrs. Schnartner, who happens to be my daughter's one of her favorite teachers, so it caught my eye. And I was wondering what kind of mentoring or guidance is in place for a long-term substitute teacher like that. I think this is the first time that I've paid attention that it has occurred in one of my child's classes. So is it similar to something that would occur with a new teacher, where some program kicks in, or what do you do with a long-term substitute replacement so the quality of the education, stays high, which it is in her class?
We approach that in a number of ways. In some cases, if we cannot get an adequate substitute, full-time substitute teacher from outside of the district, we approve 6-period assignments for teachers, so that there would be teachers who have already been teaching that class, who would, in addition to their regular 5 classes, would teach a 6th class. If we don't do that, there are many other cases where we simply look for someone who seems to be a good fit, who has the requisite credentials and has hopefully taught those classes.